It's the Underdogs back with you for another episode, a very special episode. It is our college football preview. I'm Jordan Brenner, back after a week off. There's Peter Keating, carried the show without me, and joining us as a guest, but we hope he'll be more than a guest this fall. We hope to see him quite a bit. It's Mike Golic Jr. You know him from Gojo and Golic. Hi, guys.
Welcome back, Jordan, and welcome back, Mike.
Are you ready for some college football?
Is there a theme song I should be humming or singing? What do we do at this point? I think we're ready. Yeah.
I think it's the Notre Dame fight song in honor of Gojo over there.
I have gone through so many different points of anxiety before we've even kicked off in week one with that team. So it's how it's much like when I was playing. There's a weird anxiety right before the start of training camp where I'm not fit to be around human beings. It is that same way now heading into week one as a fan.
That's how I feel sort of, when I haven't been on a show in a week and I have to get back with Peter. It's the same anxiety.
I left the misbehavior button at home, Jordan, so it's okay.
Did you miss me last week? Were you able to carry on?
We missed you. It was a barely. I mean, we were able to talk WNBA and get into it enough that I lost track of the fact that you weren't here, and my aching sorrow faded enough that we were able to do some analysis. But the low is now over, Jordan. We're all back to normal. We're all high again.
All right. Well, I'm going to rule the show with an iron fist in terms of, format.
In terms of what? What are you ruling with an iron fist?
Format and the Peter mute button.
Finish that sentence plausibly, Jordan. I don't know if you can.
Sarah, our producer, and I have come to an agreement on this one.
Don't try to rope producer Sarah into siding with you on anything. Sarah's the one who rules this thing with an iron fist.
Fair enough. All right. So what I want to start out with first is let's talk about national champions, but I want to focus on teams outside of that consensus top 4, maybe top 5, who everybody seems to think are the cream of the crop: Georgia, Ohio State, etc. Who are the teams that you most like as sort of an underdog national championship team outside of the top 4, the top 5? Peter, I think you even had a thought on like an odds breaking point, right?
Well, I think there are 4 teams right now that have shorter odds than plus 1,200. And I know you always accuse me of picking the underdogs that really aren't underdogs. They just happen to be good enough to not be in the, happen to be bad enough to not be in the top 3 or something, like Mookie Betts for MVP or something. So, but I think we can go down to the ranking of Alabama and below them, whatever the numerical cutoff is. I think there's a consensus.
So that's
a consensus
Georgia
5 teams in the country.
Georgia plus 300, Ohio State plus 380, Oregon plus 700, Texas plus 850, and Alabama at plus 1,200. Then 6th is Ole Miss at plus 1,400, and then you're into the plus 2,000. So,
and I'll have to stay away from Ole Miss because you will accuse me of going right beneath the cutoff point, right?
Yeah. Now enough of you. Go, Joe. All right, we've set the rules here. If you had to pick one national championship team outside of that top group, what are you thinking?
Ooh, outside of that top group, and again, I'll stay away from Ole Miss as well in that vein, since we don't want to go too low there. I would say, listen, if I you know what, and I'm going to stay away from Notre Dame too. My heart is too tied up in that because that is a team that if the offensive line got figured out, I do think has enough complementary pieces to in this season make it interesting. Now, can anyone do that against the Ohio State roster or Georgia? I have no idea. They would be up there, but I'm going to leave my heart out of it. I'll go with Miami just because I don't know if I can trust
Peter.
Penn State. And I'll say, hey, if the recruiting finally catches up, Cam Ward is everything that they're talking about him to be down in South Beach as a program changer and a great leader in addition to a quarterback that can elevate you beyond what Tyler Van Dyke was going to do in that offense, combined with all the young defensive pieces that they've gotten through recruiting there. I'll say Miami in an ACC that we now saw with Florida State looks a little bit different, I think, in a lot of people's mind, or maybe it doesn't. Florida State was a favorite for a lot of people, but Miami, Clemson, all right around there in the ACC. But I'd say if we were going outside of that, Miami has been building in a way that now a quarterback of that caliber coming over should help vault them into that next level.
Well, they certainly qualify as some kind of post-hype sleeper, right? Because we had a lot of analytical reasons to like Miami last year, right? And I think even the year before. Now, I think the hype or the talk around them has calm down a little, but it's also an interesting bet to say Miami because a lot has to come together, right? And if you're picking an underdog, you want to go for some kind of chaos, some kind of high upside, even though there's low side. And so it's a smart idea to find a team where all the pieces are there. Question is, can they assemble them all and do it, right? Especially at the quarterback position. There's also an interesting question about just how strong the ACC is, right? I mean, if everything comes together for Miami, they could blow through that conference. So that's a high upside pick.
Before we get to your pick of low upside, Peter, I'm wondering, either of you guys weigh in on this. Picking a national champion is a very different formula now that we're going from 4 to 12 playoff teams, right? Before it was like, who can have a perfect regular season pretty much? Who can even get themselves into the hunt? Now you've got to think about, okay, is there a team that could maybe lose 3 games, but has the ability then to run off in a one and done scenario, a streak of 3 or 4 wins in a row? Does this change your thinking at all? Does it change the type of teams you're looking at? Is there something to be said for the type of team that can run the gauntlet in a regular season? And maybe you're looking for a weak league versus someone who has different set of skills in a one and done, can challenge the big dogs in a playoff field.
I do think it's largely trenches based, and I know that's a cop-out answer for me as someone that played the position, but I think that was always something that when you looked at whatever the playoff format was, when it was the old BCS and you had that gap in time, it allowed teams that were deeper to get their guys healthy during that 4-month layoff. Now the premium is more, hey, that depth of talent to be able to survive that war of attrition, and especially along the lines of scrimmage. And I think that's probably why, looking at Miami, I'm a little more comfortable than I've been in the past, because it's starting to look like Mario Cristobal's kind of unit up front on that line. And so I do think that's going to be the biggest difference. And we know Bud Elliott always talks about the blue chip ratio over at 24/7, but that depth of talent, even in an era where you can portal in guys, and that's obviously a factor, you've still got to have that bedrock, because come December and January football, you're going to be tested in a different way than you ever have been.
Yep.
I'll just add one more. I add one thing to that, Jordan, which is I think what you said it would apply in a normal year. This year there does seem to be quite a drop off from the top 2 or 3 teams to everyone else, and so I don't know if a national champion is going to come from a get into the new playoffs and make a run. I think you still have to go really top heavy for a national champion pick. Not so much for underdogs who might make the playoffs.
Well, we'll get into that in a second. We got some really fun analysis on that. But real quick, Peter, do you have a pick for a team outside of the top 4 or 5, since you just completely crapped on the whole idea of it?
No. I didn't. I just think that it's really going to be really tough to beat Georgia or Ohio State, unfortunately. So I'm actually going to go, just mentioned Bud Elliott and the blue chip ratio. There's an interesting team sitting in the very top reaches of how many of their recruits are 4 or 5 star recruits. 4th in the whole country. Right below the likes of Georgia and Alabama is Texas A&M. And I thought I might pick them just because they're beginning the season against Notre Dame. And so if they beat Mike's Notre Dame team, they'll get a lot of publicity. They'll be off to a great start. They have underperformed given how many gazillions of dollars they have there, but they got a new coach who did great at Duke. I think the quarterback's for real. They have a massive offensive line, and they have 79% of their recruits, which is an astounding number, are blue chip guys. And I don't know any way to make predictions about the effects of portal transfers. In a couple of years, we'll be able to make predictive analysis about guys who come through the portal. Right now, you got to look at the guys who are there and who they've developed and who they've recruited, and they've done a great job of that.
Well, I'm here for the Mike Elko, Riley Leonard matchup as the lone supporter in the country of Duke football. So I'm excited. But Texas A&M is ranked 20th to begin the season. Peter, I want to dig deeper now. And we did some really interesting research, if I do say myself, in an article we wrote for The Athletic about looking at unranked teams that might make it into the college football playoff. A lot of people think of college football as a very formulaic sport, a very top-heavy sport, a very predictable sport. But from what we've studied in the past decade, anywhere from 1 to 2 teams usually annually. I think it's about 1.7 per year outside of the weird COVID 2020, 2021 seasons, began the season unranked and ended up the season in the top 10 of the CFP rankings, which this season would put them in the playoff. So someone, maybe even 2 or 3 someones, are going to surprise everyone, are going to be outside of the preseason top 25 and find themselves in the college football playoff. We endeavored to figure out who. So Peter, why don't you explain our process of stats a little bit to our friend, Mr. Golic, and then he can weigh in on some of these teams that popped up.
Well, we didn't want to do too much math this time around. So we basically just did rounds of eliminations, right? We looked at power conference programs. That narrows it down. Again, starting out with teams that are not ranked, right? So below the top 20, 25, Jordan, it was below the top 25, right?
Right. Anyone who was unranked in the preseason. And then we found that over the past 10 seasons, every team that made it into the top 10 in the final college football playoff poll was a power conference team. So we were able to eliminate everyone outside of the big four conferences now. That got us down to what, 43
like
teams?
For
left?
a pool of 43 teams. We also found that teams that did that were long shots, but not extreme long shots. It had a couple of plus 100,000 bets to win the national championship, making the top 10. But on the most part, they were plus 35,000 or below. So you're looking at the teams sitting in that tier below the top 20 teams, right? We also found that they had strong recruiting classes, at least 3 top 50 classes in the past 4 seasons, right? We also found that they had new blood on the coaching staff. Either the coach or one of the coordinators was in his first or second year on the job for all of these teams. So there were new systems in place. And that got us down really quickly. Just cutting out making those common sense eliminations got us down to a pool of 7 teams really fast.
We ended up with 7, right?
7, yes.
Couple other, I'm not sure where 17 came from, Mr. Keating, but
I said 7 teams. 7
7
teams.
teams. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yes, there were a couple of, every team won at least 4 games the year before, so they weren't truly awful. You mentioned the odds. They also had strong opponent schedules the year before,
yeah,
right?
strong strengths of schedules. Nobody had a pot or puff schedule. Maybe that was one reason they were better than they looked, because they all played strong opponents.
And they also couldn't have been too good the year before, or otherwise they'd be basically the theory, like Washington, right? The theory is that if you won that many games, more than 10 games the year before, and you're unranked to begin the next year, something dramatic must have happened.
Right.
You must have
lost all your players, all your
coach,
all your everything. So, but that basically got rid of Washington from last year as a possibility.
So ready? Here's who the 7 teams that hit all the points ended up being, okay? Louisville, Nebraska, Florida, Wisconsin, Kentucky, TCU, and Auburn. Okay. So, having heard all of that.
Did you mention Florida?
Yes, Florida I mentioned. Initial thoughts of that list of 7, anyone jumping out to you?
I mean, the interesting one for, I think, obvious reasons is Nebraska, just because a quarterback like Dylan Raiola sort of changes the math. They've reset lines of scrimmage, especially defensively in the front 7 last year, to a place that felt far more competitive in the Big Ten, because some of the other ones, Wisconsin feels like it's a year away. That's just such a massive overhaul in terms of identity in that program under Luke Fickell in the first year that didn't quite gel as quickly. Louisville's going to be interesting. Well-coached outfit, quality Ashton Gelati on defense, quality pass rushing player, stuff like that popped up last year, some big wins. So, I mean, those teams all make sense. They're always right around that range that you talked about. So but I would say Nebraska is the one to me that stood out, again, just because the quarterback potential there creates such an opportunity for upside.
Sure. And that's not even factored really into the thing,
right?
We did the research we did, right? He's a wild card. So even on putting him aside, there are some reasons to see some patterns there. I'm wondering what you also think about TCU, okay? Because it feels a little bit familiar since this happened 2 years ago. They were 5-7 in 2021 or 2022. They come out and go undefeated and make it to the national championship game. Well, this year, Sonny Dykes is still there, but they got a new defensive coordinator. They got a top 50 recruiting class each of the past 3 years. 10 of 22 starters are back. And I don't know that the Big 12 is so daunting that this team can't make a run. You have any sort of deja vu thoughts toward TCU this year?
Not in terms of them making like that ultimate run, but I definitely think it's going to be a good reminder that what we saw last year, I don't think was a true reflection of what Sonny Dykes' TCU program is going to be. There's a penalty for and we've seen this a lot, especially in the Big 12 with some schools. You think Kansas State when the coaching change happened there, and a couple other schools where you're taking over, especially senior-laden rosters along the lines of scrimmage. But in TCU case, it was everybody. It was quarterback, it was receivers, it was important players up front. So I do think that'll stabilize some, and they're going to be a team that probably didn't get enough billing in the preseason.
And Jordan, what you mentioned about coming out of nowhere, that's an important thing for people to remember. Like, while people think that college football is so top heavy, there are teams that completely surprise even in the biggest power conferences. I mean, last year, Missouri, right? The year before, Tennessee. Even in the SEC, surprise teams can come out, do very well, and go from unranked to top 10. And TCU's already done it, like you pointed out.
So we should dig into those three SEC teams here a little more, right? Auburn, Florida, and Kentucky. Obviously, the biggest challenge is just navigating their own conference. But again, certainly plenty of talent with those three rosters, just if you look at recruiting. Mike, how do you sort those guys out?
Unfortunately, I put Florida off to the side right away because we've seen the juggernaut schedule graphics that have come out there. I just don't know how you survive that at this juncture for Billy Napier and that program. Like, I get it's going to be hard for everyone now. Consolidating conferences is going to create a lot more of these, like, oh, wow, helmet sticker schedules. But there are some stretches in that schedule that just no team is built to survive. And if you do, then congratulations, ascend to Valhalla because you'll have earned it as a worthy warrior. But I would say Auburn's going to be interesting right now. I mean, we understand the Hugh Freeze move, the hiring thought process there. The irony that now Nick Saban, the very reason that you went back and did this, is no longer the threat in the conference for you anymore. But we've seen stylistically the problems that they can create there. So that would probably be the most interesting one to me. Kentucky, I feel like we kind of know where they are at this point. I've said Mark Stoops is the best job in the country. I would never leave because of the expectations and the reality of that program. So Auburn, to me, the most variable.
Jordan, there's usually no big deal, no big difference between projecting how good a team should be and what their record's going to be, right? But I noticed that ESPN's SP Plus system has Florida ranked as the 23rd best team going into this season, but also projected to win 5.4 games. So they look like we can project all we want, but the schedule is going to make them a hard luck case. I will just say Auburn outscored their opponents last year, but managed to finish under 500. When you do that and you bring back a lot of starters, including your quarterback, so there's a reason to expect continuity, those teams often take giant leaps. It happened with Kansas, Oklahoma, I believe Texas last year. There are good underlying statistical reasons as well as the talent there to expect at least a few more wins there.
So the only team on that list we didn't touch on in the last couple minutes we have here is Louisville. 10-4 last year. Championship odds aren't crazy at plus 15,000. Everyone loves a 25-year-old quarterback. What do we think? And we talked about maybe there being openings in the ACC too. Great transfer class too, right? Anything there? Any legs?
Not outside of defense that plays fast and downhill. Jeff Brom's a coach that you can trust. The Tyler Shuck factor does feel unfortunately limiting though, because at this point it's kind of like the conversation we had in a bigger level with DJU at Florida State, where if you come in and you've got enough talent around to buoy, he can be someone that helps you win, but he's never going to be the reason. And I think at that point, we're kind of here with the quarterback as well. So I would just look at that and say, unfortunately, that would probably put a ceiling on what's capable. But as long as Jeff Brom is there, I do feel pretty comfortable that the bones of that team are going to be good enough.
Just to see if I could get any random facts about the quarterback, I looked at his Instagram feed, and there were fans posting things like, "It's year 6, dude, get a job." So I feel for the guy, but I think that's right. I think we've seen what he can do, and I don't know if he's going to be. I mean, the difference maker is going to come in Nebraska. Look, let's end on a note of excitement, Jordan. All three of us are loving Nebraska. It's not just the great new quarterback. They're returning 7 starters on defense. Their defense gave up 120 something points last year, fewer than the year before. Like, they've arrived on defense, and now they have maybe the best freshman in the country at quarterback, and a coach who makes his teams improve drastically everywhere he's been in the second year that he takes over. And that's a lot of value sitting there at plus 20,000, I think.
Well, look, you mentioned getting a job. Mike Golic Jr. doesn't need any more jobs. He has enough, but we're going to hopefully drag him into our show a few more times this fall. So until then, Gojo, great seeing you. And if you're listening, we'll be back right after this with one special pick for you all. We're back, and we've got the under of the week for you. Under the week is brought to you by DraftKings. Dive into all the action with our partners at DraftKings Sportsbook. New customers bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets instantly. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use code UNDERDOGS. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. And Peter, we're going to go to the NFL for this week's under. There's some fun bets you can find on DraftKings if you go to the NFL under season high totals rushing. You find this one, regular season total highest rushing yards, and it's over under 1,600.5. You can get it at minus 115 for the over or the under. Peter, let's take the under 1,600.5. And I'll explain my reasoning first and see if you agree, okay? First of all, 1,600 yards is a lot of yards. Now, the over has hit 3 of the last 4 years. Last year was under. Christian McCaffrey was the leading rusher with 1,459. The year before, Josh Jacobs hit the over. The year before that, Jonathan Taylor at 1,811. The year before that, 2020, Derrick Henry had 2,027 yards. The under had hit 3 years before that. But here's what I'm thinking, okay? A lot of people first will say, well, the 17th game in the schedule adds opportunities to pile up even more yards. True, but it also has more opportunities to get injured. The reason why I don't like any individual running back going over this total this year is twofold. One, so many backs are in timeshares or at least some sort of committee work. And two, a lot of the best pure rushers in football happen to be playing with rushing quarterbacks this year. So will Jonathan Taylor's yardage be limited by the fact that he's playing with Anthony Richardson? Will Derrick Henry's be limited by the fact that he's going to play with Lamar Jackson now? Saquon Barkley's playing with Jalen Hurts. I feel like the biggest threat to this number is Breece Hall, probably. If he stays healthy, plays a full 17 games, there's a chance he could break 1,600. But I feel pretty comfortable taking the under. What do you think?
Yeah, I was trying to think of what you'd need for somebody to hit that over. You need a running back who's young, still improving, a workhorse, plays for a team that rushes a lot, right? I think maybe Bijan Robinson. But even Bijan Robinson is in a platoon or timeshare, right? Great running backs are now in timeshares. As you said, there's rushing quarterbacks all over the league. The big thing, of course, is injuries. I think the numbers on the season specials in general, high passing yards for quarterback, touchdown totals, and especially this rushing total, reflect an era of just a few years ago when injuries weren't happening on a rampant basis from week to week to week among skilled players. I mean, it's hard to stay in long enough. I mean, you think about it, McCaffrey runs the ball as well and as hard for a team that will use their running back as often as they use him. And he was 150 yards short of this last year. And Derrick Henry is a superstar with a singular talent who's done his 2,000-yard season. He's a little older now, and he's playing with Lamar Jackson. So I just can't see it happening.
Yeah, look, I mean, there's certainly a window. There's a reason why this is an even money bet either way, right? I certainly,
but Jordan,
I can see it happening. I just think there are more paths to it not happening, right?
Right, but
And
I mean, right.
that,
And so even if you look at Saquon, if you ask people who are huge Saquon Barkley fans, now he's going to get to play in back of a great line. Now he's healthy. He's still under 30. What's his upside? What's the best season you can see him happening? They'll say 1,300 yards and 9 touchdowns would be fantastic. That's 300 yards short of this bet. That's all I'm saying.
Yes, and I think again, to me, I think a big piece of this puzzle is going to be with the longer season. Teams are just going to be more willing to give a running back who's a little banged up a game off, a game or two off, right? Why trot him out there in this slog of a deep run to the playoffs when there are so many fresh legs behind him? You know, you don't want a guy at 75% out there if it's going to lead to a lingering issue. So that's a big factor. I mean, there's a reason why most of you in your fantasy football drafts are employing some sort of hero running back or zero running back system, right? There's so much volatility at the position, so many injuries, it's so hard to predict. And so if we narrow down the teams that even have a chance to have someone go over this number, what is it, maybe 5? It's not leaving many options.
Right.
But you know what? One option. Go Go on.
No, I was just going to say even platooning running backs by style now instead of number 1, 2, and 3 according to quality. So there are a lot of options for teams other than just having one guy run till he drops.